time I was up here. I'm so glad that you guys have joined us this morning, and I also want to welcome our friends who are watching online. It's a joy to be here with you guys this morning. We are in the middle of a series right now talking about peacemaking, what it means to be people of peace, what that looks like to be people of peace. So the first week, we talked about when we experience conflict, when we come up against something and we realize, oh, we don't see eye to eye on this, that the first thing we need to do is develop a longer fuse. That instead of just immediately blowing up and putting on our boxing gloves and fighting it out, that we develop a little bit of a longer fuse. We take just a few seconds. We take a few deep breaths. We develop a longer fuse when we know that conflict is coming. And then the second week, we talked about actually sitting down with the people that we have conflict with. That, okay, we've taken a breath, and now we're going to come together, and it's going to be okay. We're going to sit down with the people that we don't agree with, that we maybe don't see eye to eye, and we're actually going to be willing to talk it out, to have a conversation about this disagreement, this thing we're dealing with. And then last week, we talked about how we can listen well to others, where we actually will let them speak and say what's on their mind and say the things that they believe and are convicted about, and we're going to listen well to them. But now we've gotten to the moment that some of you have been waiting for since week 1. Now we get to think about how we might actually respond in times of conflict. How we express our convictions in light of the fact that we are called to be peacemakers. How do we respond in a spirit of peace? Some of us are a little too excited about today. You have been looking forward to this moment. But I'll let you know, if you're anything like me, this week was a little bit convicting to think about actually really what it means to speak as a person of peace. James chapter 1 instructs us about what this might look like. James 1:19 through 21 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen." We've done that, check. Slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth, the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Humbly accept the word planted in you. What is the word that has been planted within us? What is this thing that we are taking with us into conflict? Ephesians chapter 6 gives us this image of what it looks like to kind of put on all of these different pieces, this armor, if you will, as people of God. And we've got truth, and we've got justice, and we've got grace, and we're kind of clothing ourselves with all of these things as the people of God. But then Ephesians 6:15 says this, "With your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace." The gospel of peace is what we are fitted with. That word gospel means good news. The word that has been planted within us, the gospel, the good news within us, is one of peace. That as we prepare to navigate conflict well, we must do it with the gospel of peace planted within us, fitting firmly around us. At the core of who we are as the people of God, at the core of God's message to us, is a gospel of peace. Jesus came so that we might have peace between the broken relationship between us and God. Jesus came so that we might have peace between one another. Jesus came so that we might have peace with creation. Jesus came so that we might have peace within ourselves. The gospel of peace is at the core of who we are as the people of God. So the practice of peacemaking is important. The practice of peacemaking doesn't have to change our convictions, but it must change the way that we express them. Peacemaking doesn't have to be something that comes in and completely messes up all of the things that you think and believe, but it must change the way that you express them. This is the practice of peacemaking. It's our commitment to it. But what does that look like? How do we respond as peacemakers? How do we do that together? Let's look back at James chapter 1. Brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, the gospel of peace, which can save you. The first thing that we notice in this passage is the attention that's given to our anger. Slow to anger. Anger is not helpful in the practice of peacemaking. Anger should not be our first response. It reminds me of this scene from the first Avengers movie, where the enemy is like wreaking havoc on downtown New York. And the Avengers are there, and Dr. Bruce Banner, who sometimes turns into the Incredible Hulk, he like shows up on a motorcycle as like the doctor. And they're like, hey, good to see you. And as they're having this interaction, the creatures that have been wreaking havoc are like turning the corner, and the Avengers are like gearing up, like it is their turn to join the fight. It is their turn to do something. And Captain America looks at Dr. Banner and he says, hey, doctor, now would be a really good time to get angry. And he goes, that's my secret. I'm always angry. And he turns around and he goes like full Hulk on them, and it's this epic moment. And in a superhero movie, that's exactly what you want. But in the practice of peacemaking, that should not be our first response. See, we have been sitting here patiently. We have developed a longer fuse. We've been committed to sitting down and talking through our conflict, and we have been patiently waiting, and we have let them say what they want to say and do what they're going to do and wreak the havoc they're going to havoc. And now it is our turn to respond. And sometimes we think now would be a really good time to get angry. But anger has no place in the practice of peacemaking. The first step to practicing peacemaking, how we respond as peacemakers, is without anger. Get it out. It's got no place here. But that's not the only thing this passage tells us. Verse 21 says, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Humbly accept the word planted in you. Humility. Yuck, right? Humility. In the context of a debate, when we're sitting there with people we don't really get along with, and we're not really so sure about, humility is our ability to sit there and admit the possibility that we could be wrong. I know that none of you have ever been wrong before. But just imagine with me, if you will, that you have not always believed and felt the way that you do right in this moment. That when you have learned and you have grown and there are new information you've been presented with, your opinions and your convictions have actually changed over time. So it would be unwise for us to think that what we think and believe right now in this moment is always what we will think and believe. Humility is admitting the fact that maybe, possibly, probably, someday, you might think differently. Humility is being open to the possibility that you could actually be wrong, or that you are open to your position or the things that you believe to change. There's this podcast that I listen to, and one of the things that they do on this podcast is they put two people in there who believe completely different things on two different sides of an argument. And then they let them go at it. But it's like a formal debate. So it's not that they sit there and they scream at each other. Like this person presents their arguments and this person presents their arguments, and then they have a rebuttal, and they go back and forth. Opposite sides of a really complicated problem. But at the end, they always make them end by answering these two things. And the first one is this: they have to acknowledge one thing about their own position or conviction that they still have questions or concerns about. One thing about their position that they have questions or concerns about. They make them sit there and admit the fact that maybe, possibly, in some other world, maybe, you and I could be wrong from time to time. Humility. Being open to the possibility that you could be wrong or that your opinions could change. That is what we bring to the conversation when we are coming in a spirit of peace. How do we respond as peacemakers? First, without anger, and then with deep humility. But that's not the only passage we hear that talks about what we should do in conflict as peacemakers. Colossians chapter 4 talks about this a lot too. Colossians 4 verses 5 and 6 say, "Be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders, those you don't get along with. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Make the most of every opportunity. It's an interesting phrase, but I think what it is it's an invitation to a middle ground. Because I think sometimes there are those of us who wake up in the morning and are just ready to fight. We are ready to put on the boxing gloves. We are ready to go out of it. We seek out conflict. We are prepared for it. We get excited by it. We are ready. And then others of us will run from it. But when we say, make the most of every opportunity, what it's actually saying is, don't go seek out conflict, but don't run from it either when it comes. Conflict is coming. It's inevitable. Make the most of every opportunity to respond as peacemakers. It's an invitation to come to the middle ground. For me, I think I struggle with the first one a little bit more. Like, I wake up in the morning ready to rage against the machine sometimes. Like, I am ready to fight. I am ready. I'm opinionated, and I am ready. And I am willing to fight anybody over anything. And this passage is saying, whoa, Hannah. Calm down. That is not the spirit of peacemaking. We don't seek out conflict for fun. No. We navigate it well when it comes. But others of you are not like me. Thank the Lord. And you do the opposite. You run the other direction, and you are like going to take your opinions and your feelings and shove them so far down. Like, they're just going to be buried there, and you're going to run from conflict, and you're never going to say what you feel because, like, you don't want problems with anybody. And you will let people walk all over you, and you're just going to hide from it, right? Just hoping you can get through the day without ever having conflict with anyone. But this is actually an invitation to say, you know what? Conflict's inevitable. We don't always agree. Navigate it well. Make the most of every opportunity. But that's not all Colossians says. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Full of grace. Looking towards others with grace. It's this sense of having a sort of compassion, a kindness towards others. That we can look towards others with grace in our hearts because we recognize that we've also been given incredible grace by God. That we can talk to others with a type of kindness and compassion and grace in our hearts because God has talked to us and dealt with us with grace and compassion and kindness. A commitment to looking at one another the way that God looks at us, with grace. That podcast that I listened to, the first question they make you answer is, what's one thing about your position that you have questions or problems with? The second thing that they make you answer is, what is one thing about the other person's position that you like? What is one thing about the other person's position that you like or respect? Yikes. It's a moment where they actually have to sit there and vocalize, okay, there's actually some redeemable quality about you and about what you believe. There is something worthy there, and I can look at you with grace and compassion and kindness in my heart, that I'm not willing to throw out everything that you've said. I can acknowledge there's something redeemable here. How do we respond as peacemakers? Without anger and with humility and with incredible grace, because we have been shown incredible grace. And we should look at people with compassion and kindness the way that we have been looked at with compassion and kindness. After it tells us to look at one another with grace, there's this weird phrase in verse 6 that says, seasoned with salt. I don't know about you guys, but I don't carry around salt in my backpack for like when I run into people that I have problems with. I don't think like this passage is telling us we should just throw salt on people. Although if you try that method, please let me know how it works out for you. So what does it mean? Seasoned with salt. Have you ever tasted anything that needed a little salt? Where you've eaten it and you've been like, this could use some salt. It's not necessarily that the contents of what you're eating is bad. It's how it's been presented to you. It's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with the meal. It's that when you receive it, it's a little unsavory. The way that you consume it is not the most ideal. When we speak to one another, seasoned with salt, it's an understanding that we have a commitment to not only what we're saying, but how we're saying it and how it is received by the other person. We not only care that we are communicating our convictions well, we care that we are saying them in such a way that other people receive it well. It means that when we're navigating conflict, our commitment is always, always to the person over the problem. We are committed deeply to the people over the problem. We care about the way that they receive it. We care how this affects them. We care deeply about them as a person more than we ever care about the problem or the conversation at hand. People are people to be loved, not problems to be solved. Seasoned with salt, a commitment to pursuing the relationship with people over and above your right to solve this problem. How do we respond as peacemakers without anger and with humility and with incredible grace in our hearts because it's what we've been given, and with a commitment always to people above the problem? This is the way of peacemaking. This is how we respond as people of peace. The practice of peacemaking doesn't have to change our convictions, but it must change the way that we express them. I've been a part of this church since 2018, and I've seen our church go through a lot. I've celebrated a lot of really good things that have happened here, and I've seen us navigate some difficult moments, and I've seen us navigate conflicts. But there's one memory I have that really sticks out in my mind from my time here. Back when our church bought the land that we're sitting on right now, they bought more than they knew that we would ever use in the future, and so there was always a plan to someday sell off part of the land that we have. And in 2020, we actually were able to do that. So they had waited for the right price and all the things aligned where we were able to sell off part of the property we knew that we weren't going to be using in the future. So it's actually this property over here where like Duncan and all that is over here, and then back where they're building these new housing developments, some of that. So we sold that off and we got the money from that. And then the church was kind of faced with a choice. What do we do with this money that we have? How do we be good stewards of this? What do we do with this? And there were a lot of opinions. And there are some people who had some really strong opinions about what we should do one way or another. And so we had a members meeting, and we talked about what do we do with this money. And ultimately, what the church decided is that we took 10% of the money and we actually put it back into the community. We blessed some of our community partners, and we're generous with the money we'd been given and put it back into the community. It was a cool moment, but I actually think the moment that sticks out in my mind more is what happened after. After this meeting had happened, where there was people who had come up and expressed their opinions on both sides of all of the angles, right? But for 20 or 30 minutes after this meeting, people kind of just hung out. And I watched people who had been on opposite sides of a disagreement talking. And they weren't even really talking about what we had just decided. They were just talking about life, about sports, about their family. They were laughing together. And there was this beautiful moment where I got to see, like, this is it. This is what it means to be people who navigate conflict as peacemakers. And that's a story that no one outside of this building will ever know, but it's what sticks in my mind. I have seen our church do this so well. And I think that it's God's desire that we do it again. there are so many things that are coming in 2024, some that we know and some that we don't. And there are going to be moments where we disagree on things. In the church, outside of the church, in the city, in our nation. And you may find yourself in conflict with, in disagreement with, some of the people sitting in this very room. But we are called to be people of peace. And we've done it before. Let's do it again. Let's respond to anything and everything that comes our way without anger and with humility and with grace and with a fierce commitment to one another over anything we could disagree on. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we call you the Prince of Peace, because you are the one who has shown us what it means to live in peace with God, with one another, with ourselves, with the world. Would you give us the courage to walk in your peace? To acknowledge the places in our life where we are struggling to be peacemakers. Would you step in and remind us of the grace that you have shown us? And would you encourage your people to look more and more like you, God? Would you make us peacemakers? And would you grant us grace for when we don't navigate conflict well? It's in your name that we pray.